Mavis, if you can switch on your video, we will start in the next 40 seconds.
Roy, will you have this in speaker view so that it spotlights yourself?
So it's on speaker view right now.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. So that's for the recording, yes?
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, it's on speaker view right now.
Good.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the AFBE Leadership Talk program. It has been a nice evening today, sunny and snowy at the same time. Today, I would like to introduce my special guest, Mavis Anagboso. Mavis is the founder, managing director of Toju Consulting. She's an executive coach, and she's built a business around diversity and inclusion framework to support business leaders. She has worked at various leadership roles, both in the UK civil service and in the oil and gas industry as well. She is currently an active member of the OG UK Diversity and Inclusion Task Group, and she's also a family woman, a keen heel walker, and also an amateur sailor. Thank you, Mavis, for joining us today.
Thanks, Roy.
Before we go into you, I would also like to thank my two co-hosts, Abby Goswami and Bitrus as well. They will be supporting us throughout this program. Please, if you have any questions, I would like for you to post them in the chat group. If I don't pick them up, Abby or Bitrus will pick them up and would ask Mavis. So if there's any questions at all, please don't hesitate to ask your questions. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. It will be a 1-hour talk show, and we will try and keep to time. So, Mavis, thank you for accepting to come on this talk show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
Before we jump into the topic for the day, I would like you to tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us about your career, your experience, and something we don't know about you that's not there.
I'll have to think about that while I speak then. So thanks, Roy. I'm happy to be here. Thanks to the AFBE group. It's nice to be speaking on diversity and inclusion this evening. So I started my career as a macroeconomist here in the UK, civil service about 20 years ago. It was an amazing career. I saw me work with high-profile stakeholders across the UK government, so Bank of England, Treasury, Ministry of Defence, you name it. The devolved governments of Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland as well. So even though it's fairly recently, as in about 2 decades ago, it was a time where I was the only Black person in most of the circles I worked in. So as the most senior Black figure in the ONS in the Wales office, I often felt like I was representing my race a lot of the time, and it's a huge burden to carry around. So it forced me to think about race in a slightly different way. And I didn't feel like my white colleagues walked around with the same weight of expectation on their shoulders. And one of the other reasons as well I spent some time thinking about race is because I dropped my first name, my Nigerian name, from job applications after my MSc, so before I entered the job market here in the UK. And the reason for that is it's actually quite simple. I wasn't getting callbacks, when I was applying for jobs. And on the advice of some friends, I decided, I was going to drop the Nigerian name called Toju. And I just went by middle name, Mavis, which is a name I never went by before I moved to the UK. So this, I think, accounted for the invisible weight I carried around with me in the early stages of my career. And, I had that feeling of not being my authentic self at work. And it's what actually inspired me to become invested in diversity at work. And I've not stopped since then. So I've been involved in diversity and inclusion ever since then. So about 20 years I've been involved in this.
Wow, it's amazing. It's interesting to know that you had to drop your name to get calls for interviews or even to get anywhere in the job market. And I believe this is the experience that a lot of us have had. For example, my first name is Ponfer, But I find that people struggle, and when I looked for jobs back then when I was in England, it was very difficult. So I switched to my middle name, Roy, and I've kept Roy ever since. And I think that is the experience of many Black people, certainly Black people, and also people of Asian and minority descent in the UK.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting. Before we jump into the topic today, there's certainly been a lot of buzz and conversations and discussions around diversity and racial parity. From your experience till date, I would like you to shed a little bit of light on this particular topic with regards to, do you think companies are actually driven to address these issues, or are they just merely mentioning it? Are they just having discussions about it without really taking active steps to solve this issue?
So that's a really good question, Roy. I think companies are saying the right things in terms of we're hearing the right noises coming from companies, but in terms of action matching the words, I don't see enough action. So we've got companies who are making some sort of really some deep fundamental changes in how they operate in terms of being intentional about who they recruit, who they promote through the talent pipeline and so on. How they build a new culture that is more inclusive. But there's only very few companies actively doing that, because if everyone was doing exactly what they said since last summer when we had the Black Lives Matter movement, we probably wouldn't be talking about, at the present time, not a single Black senior executive in the FTSE 100. So there's no Black CEO or CFO in the top 100 companies operating in the UK. So I think there's still a lot to do. And a lot of it stems from the fact that people do not understand what diversity and inclusion actually does mean. So, or actually do mean. When you talk about diversity and inclusion, some companies think it's as simple as setting up ERG groups, so employee resource groups. They think it's as simple as getting managers trained on unconscious bias training. So there's a lot more to diversity than few training courses, setting up, groups of Black people, groups of Asian. You need to do a lot more than that. You need to build a robust framework that will ensure that you're set up for success, that will ensure that your employees feel included, that will ensure your leadership team reflects the society we live in. So if there's anyone on this call now, just try and reflect on what your leadership team looks like. So the most senior people in your company, I bet you will not see diversity represented there. So do they look like members of society? Probably not. It's going to be probably very pale and male. So we need to move away from that and be intentional about how we actually create an inclusive work environment.
Okay, that's very good. I believe that before the end of this program, we will get some practical steps from you on how companies can help to address this particular issue. But before we go into that, you mentioned something, the FTSE 100, no Black executives. For me, as a Black man, I'm thinking to myself, is it that we don't have enough qualified Black people, or even Asian or ethnic minority people, who can fill this executive leadership slots? Or is it that there's a barrier, unseen or perceived or not perceived, that is stopping Black people from ascending into such executive positions?
I think what you're describing there, Roy, is a glass ceiling. So the thing about glass ceilings, at least clean ones, is you may not realize they're there. So it's a difficult thing for me to actually say right now, but for people of color, there's a fundamental assumption that at a very deep level, people are incompetent. So you're assumed incompetent based on race. And this is uncomfortable for me to say, but it's fact. What this means is, by assuming someone is incompetent until they prove otherwise, you exclude them unintentionally. And exclusion is one of the biggest obstacles faced in the workplace. I'm talking about exclusion from the highest level of decision making. So back to the point I said earlier on, Roy, who's making decisions in your company? Do you see diversity represented there? Because your CEOs and your leadership team can talk about diversity so the cows come home, but if they don't represent diversity of thinking, diversity of thought in the boardroom, how can they be serious about diversity? If you're excluded, you'll be excluded from broadening or stretch assignments. Because sometimes all you need is a chance. All you need is an opportunity to prove yourself, to try something new, to stretch yourself. If you don't have that opportunity, how can you progress? Exclusion as well leads to exclusion from access to sponsors. So let me just talk a little bit about sponsorship. So sponsors can be seen as influencers in the workplace. So the thing about your work speaking for yourself or for itself that we've been taught since we're little kids is it only gets you so far. You need an advocate who will speak on your behalf when you're not in the room. But sponsoring someone carries with it a risk premium, Roy. So for instance, if I want to sponsor someone, I want to sort of make sure they have the talent potential, and note the word potential. So that potential means it's a gamble for me. So it's a gamble for me to sponsor you, Roy, or someone else, because I'm not sure if you would deliver. I'm not sure if you pull through. However, for people of color, that risk premium I've just described, which everyone has, whether you're white, brown, whatever, people of color, that risk premium is higher. So what you find is you almost require close to 100% possibility of success. So it's quite an unfair sort of assumption or demand or ask from someone based on the color of their skin, because you assume that's said level of incompetence. They're looking at your degree, experience, spotless character, everything. And that's why you find that people of color tend to be most of the time overqualified. So they're the ones with the 2 master's degree, PhD and everything else. And then you can address this imbalance by talking the way we are doing right now, Roy. So having this conversation, it becomes more normalized to talk about race. Raising this awareness is actually quite critical because it ensures that we have access to allies to champion and sponsor underrepresented ethnicities in the workplace. This is not a fight for Black people, it's not a fight for Asians, it's a fight for everyone in society. Everyone needs to work together. People need to be given the opportunity to prove themselves.
Ooh, interesting. You've said a lot in that very few seconds. One thing I've picked up on, in fact, 2 things here. You said there is an assumed level of incompetence based on race. But then again, we have been competent enough to go through the educational system to earn degrees, to earn various forms of fellowships, doctoral degrees. We come out of the system, the same system that everyone's going through, and yet we're still regarded as incompetent. That doesn't add up to me.
I know it doesn't add up to you, and I'll tell you a little story. So I've been doing some research over the last 6 months to understand the lived experiences of Black people here in the UK, especially after the George Floyd murder and so on. And I've been interviewing people in-depth, qualitative interviews. I initially started off aiming to interview 20, but now I'm closer to 50, and I'm hoping to end at 50, then analyze the results. One guy in particular that really struck me was, this guy is a qualified technical person. I mean, obviously I can't give too much away because I need to protect the identities. He's a qualified technical person. I think he's got 2 masters, a PhD. He's very, very good at what he does, ambitious and all that. But he's been held back, not by a glass ceiling, but a brick wall. So it feels like he's been trying to shatter the glass ceiling. Every time he manages to get close to it, there's a brick wall that sort of magically appears there. So what it does to you, what it does to your morale and your confidence is, when there's that assumed level of incompetence around you, you need to prove yourself to people over and over again, and you see people around you being promoted. After a while, you almost start to believe that story. You come to work a smaller version of yourself. And then what happens is eventually your employer gets what they pay you for. So what he told me was, Mavis, I'm no longer fighting it. I've accepted it. I know this is probably going to be as good as it gets, and I'm just going to give them what they pay for. So he comes in and does the barest minimum. And what that means is he's underemployed. He can do so much more, but he's not given the opportunity. So it doesn't match against his skills. It doesn't match against his experiences, but that's just the sad reality we face. And that's why listening to people's lived experience is such a powerful narrative. It's more powerful than statistics. We need to talk more about these things. It's uncomfortable to talk about, it's uncomfortable to hear about, but we need to listen. Leaders need to listen so they can put the right measures in place so that the gentleman I talk to, people like him and others, are given the opportunity, the access to sponsors so they can progress in their career.
So what it seems to me is we are fighting multiple battles at the same time. First of all, it is not just that we are fighting or trying to break through or shatter through this glass ceiling. We're also having to fight internal psychological wars, because this now leads to below the line thinking, which a lot of people are faced with today. And like you said, he now decides, resolves within himself that he's going to do the barest minimum. So that means you potentially can have a workforce that is unsatisfied, underdeveloped, in the sense that they are not used according to their optimum skill sets, you know, and at the end of the day, that can reduce, the potentials of the organization in question.
Yeah, it can, and I think this leads me nicely to some statistics which will illustrate this point in terms of the value of diversity and inclusion, especially cultural and ethnic diversity. But before I talk about statistics, I'd like to illustrate this point with a little bit of fantasy. So 3 years ago, Marvel's Black Panther movie was unleashed into the world, as we all know. So it shattered box office records, took over the internet for some time, and inspired lots of people across the world. I'm one of them, Wakanda forever and all that. So I still remember seeing that movie with my very close friend in Newport in Wales. And I sat there in the theater clapping like a mad woman after the film, something I've never done before. For me, the movie signified an alternative reality where Black people can also be superheroes. And let's think about that for a second, Roy. Black people can also be superheroes and be pretty damn good at it as well. So by placing diversity in front of and behind the camera, the movie made over $1 billion, third highest grossing film of all times. So it shows that when you allow diversity of thought and representation, something magical happens. The people actually realize their potential. And just as diversity made business sense for Marvel, it also makes business sense for corporate Britain as well. So back to statistics. The value case for D&I is widely acknowledged. One of the reports I like to sort of draw on is the McKinsey study. So we thank God for McKinsey. 2015, they published a report titled Why Diversity Matters. And you can say what it did was it articulated quite clearly the business case for D&I. Last year, they revisited this relationship between diversity and financial performance. And using the largest data set to date, we're talking about over 1,000 companies across 15 countries. The results showed some really startling results. So as a recovering economist, of course, I got excited when I saw this report. And the two things that stuck out for me was, firstly, companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on their executive teams were 25% more likely to have above average profitability than companies in the fourth quartile. And in the case of ethnic and cultural diversity, do you want to guess what that figure is? 36%. 36%. So there's one thing I want the audience to take away from this conversation today is this. If the business case for ethnic diversity, so ethnic and cultural diversity, if it's more compelling than for gender diversity, why is it not getting the same focus? I'm very big on, promoting gender diversity. I'm a big advocate. I believe, we should have gender balance across society. However, if the return on investment in terms of cultural and ethnic diversity is greater for ethnic diversity, why are we not talking more about it? And then when you talk about race in general, I guess, we can't really talk about statistics or talk even further without addressing the elephant in the room, which is the recent government report on race and ethnic disparities. So a couple of people asked me my thoughts on the report before I came on air, and I said, I'll touch on it today. And I want to draw on our attention to another race report to provide an answer to my thoughts on that government report. And this is another report by Baroness McGregor Smith, published in 2017. So the independent report in 2017, titled Race in the Workplace, examined issues around race very carefully. So it's a very detailed report, over 25,000 people looking at the performance of UK PLC. And I'll urge anyone who hasn't read that to at least read the exec summary. Some stark findings in the report. The first one is 1 in 4 ethnic minorities, and by ethnic minorities, I'm talking about Black, Asian, and other ethnic minorities. They reported they've witnessed or experienced racist harassment or bullying from managers. So this is for people you report to at work in the last 2 years prior to the survey. And also the report showed a lot of ambition when it comes to ethnic minorities. Over 70% of ethnic minorities said progression was important to them, which is fair enough, compared with 42% of the white British employees. But that's not the interesting fact. The interesting fact is, coupled with that, hunger, that drive for progression, about half the people surveyed said that they felt they had to leave their current organization to progress. And this is something I see over and over again. So the nearly 50 people I've surveyed, I've interviewed in the last 6 months, they keep talking about how the only way to achieve promotion for them is to move companies, is to go into contracting. So I don't know if anyone has done this research, but I'm sure it's be an interesting topic for a PhD. The proportion of ethnic minorities contracting, particularly in oil and gas, is quite high, at least from my sort of anecdotal evidence speaking to people. And as sad as it sounds, when I looked at these statistics, I wasn't really surprised. What surprised me was finding out that not only do ethnic minorities have to live with institutional racism and bias, they're also expected to do more to fix this rather complex issue. So the report showed that about half of the ethnic minority managers had a performance objective, Roy. So they had a performance objective to promote equality and diversity compared to their white managers that only 32% had that same objective. So I find the conclusion that institutional racism doesn't exist in the UK quite contrary to the evidence from robust research and also from my personal lived experiences. End of.
Oh, wow. There's something I can personally relate to, and you see that's that talking about institutional racism and the performance objective. Throughout my time during a PhD, I realized that not many people went through what you will call a yearly review.
Mm-hmm.
You would find that most of the people who went through that yearly review were either Blacks or people of ethnic minority, Brazilians, and from other countries. The locals barely did go through. Some of them did, so don't get me wrong. Some of them did, but not all of them. In fact, most of them wouldn't go through that yearly review. And you see it happen, and you're just like, okay, maybe it's because I didn't start my educational system here. You start to form excuses for yourself, and I think that's certainly the case within the industry. People start to either look for excuses, or like you said, they start switching into contracting roles, and that can be an issue. And of course, it is a topic that I think should be addressed even separately. It's a topic that like you said, needs a research to be done in. Before we go ahead, Vanessa Abrahams has asked, she said something which I want to bring up. She says, oftentimes the education is not enough. It is the internal coaching and mentoring around success strategies within that particular company that will move you up through the pipeline. This is why mentoring and sponsorship is so critical. The education is table stakes. Now, you're certainly getting through into a company based on your initial qualifications, first of all. And once you get in, typically you would be looking for allies, or you'll be looking for sponsorships, or somebody to mentor you within the organization. So what happens when you don't even have that type of opportunity within your organization?
So when you don't have that opportunity in your organization, then you should ask for it, you should request for it. And that's why having this dialogue, this education piece is actually quite important, not just for people of color, but also people from this white majority who are responsible for making these decisions at work. I talked about exclusion earlier on, and when you're excluded from access to sponsors, you're excluded from access to coaching and support and mentoring and work, then it means that you're always sort of like a couple of steps behind from your other counterparts at work. See them getting the juicy appointments, the juicy cross-posting assignments, and opportunities to present something to the board of directors and things like that. So if you're not getting those sort of opportunities, then ask for it, request for it. It's highly unlikely that if you keep asking, you will not get eventually. No, I know it shouldn't be, a begging exercise that you're begging for it, but you should ask, be confident about your abilities and ask, believe in yourself, because the people who are getting these opportunities who do not look like you, they're not any different from you in terms of capabilities and ability. So just have that self-belief and keep asking.
So in essence, we should put ourselves out there.
You need to put yourself out there. Because for a lot of us, certainly from me in the culture I grew up in Nigeria, you're taught to be modest, particularly being a female as well. You're taught to be modest. You're told to work hard, and your work will speak for itself. You don't need to ask, and so on and so forth. Things will work out. My experience is quite different from what my dad told me. Sorry, Dad. It's the experience is, if you don't ask, if you don't put yourself out there, you're not going to get those opportunities. And I know I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but one thing I can also add to that is volunteering. If you don't have opportunities to develop leadership skills where you work, then look for opportunities outside where you work. AFBE is a fantastic example. For instance, if you're on the AFBE leadership team, for instance, that's an opportunity for you to be a leader, help coordinate and direct and drive an agenda, present more to a wider audience, which you may not have opportunity to do in the office. So just look for different avenues. Speak to people who have done it. Speak to people who are ahead of you in terms of the game of getting promoted and all that.
Fantastic. I've got a question here from Ollie, and this is going back to the statistics. It says, if the return on ethnic diversity is greater, why aren't we spending more time on it?
I wish I knew a simple answer to that question, Ollie. I honestly do not know. It's greater, and the research has been there for a number of years. It's not like it's brand new or 2021. It's just because race is a very difficult and uncomfortable topic to talk about. And it's also because the status quo is very comfortable. So people sometimes are not very sure of what they don't know, what they don't understand. If you have a leadership team that has never had a Black person, they've never had an Asian person, I mean, let's just look at ourselves. So thinking of myself as a Black female, I know that instinctively, if I'm walking on the street, for instance, and I see someone else that looks like me, for instance, you're more sort of like drawn to someone that looks like you than someone that doesn't look like you. So it takes training, and it takes exposure to people from different backgrounds for you to be used to sort of working equally with people from different walks of life. So I think the same principle applies to it in work as well. You have to be intentional. If companies are actually serious about increasing cultural and ethnic diversity, they need to be strategic. They need to be intentional about including people. What I usually tell my clients is, if you're not intentional about including people from different backgrounds, then you're excluding people automatically. Just assume you're excluding. So as a CEO, as a team leader, if I want to recruit for a position for the next, I don't know, senior reservoir engineer in my team, for instance, am I going to go for Andrew because he's the obvious choice that works in the team? Or am I going to look more broadly and look for Ahmed, look for Titi, look for different people from different backgrounds? I need to be intentional. We need to start challenging ourselves. We need to get to the point where we're challenging ourselves and asking, where is the diversity in the decision making? some companies are getting to the level now where if you're spending more than, I think, 1% of turnover, or I can't remember what the metric is, they question that and ask, where is the diversity in that decision-making process? We need to get to that level.
Interesting. You've said, where is the diversity in the decision-making? Now, talking about decision-making, a question that's burning in my heart is, what's the role of HR in diversity and inclusion, especially when it comes to, recruiting for decision makers?
I think the role of HR is, it's one that needs to be sort of married with the role of the CEO. I think this is not let me answer that question differently. This is not, diversity and inclusion is not the responsibility of HR. It's the responsibility for the decision makers in the organization. So you're looking at CEO level, and then from that, the C-suite. That's how far this needs to go. So they need to be insisting on diversity. They need to be insisting on diverse candidates when they're recruiting, either from early stages of career, middle management, and senior level. So HR, their responsibility is to help ensure that whatever the strategic direction and goal of the company is, they help embed that, they help build that, imbibe that into the organizational culture. So it's not the job of HR to ensure that diversity is done or is built in, because not everyone in HR has that power or that responsibility to make those sort of changes in the organization. It needs to come from the top down.
Okay, so talking about glass ceiling and coming from the top down, what other challenges do you see with regards to glass ceiling that stops people, that stops Blacks, Asians, and ethnic minority from progressing into that C-suite executive positions in companies?
So when you say challenges, what do you mean? Do you mean what sort of...
So we've talked about glass ceiling, yeah? I want us to break down what that glass ceiling is. I want you to break it down for us in words. What is that glass ceiling?
That glass ceiling, if I in one word, is exclusion. So, and I described this earlier on. So it's when you're excluded from key decision-making opportunities. It's when you're excluded from opportunities to allow that progression. You don't have access to the same sort of training and the same sort of resources that's usually reserved for so-called high potentials. Because if you look at the high potential talent pool, it's usually not as diverse as you would expect it to be. So what you want to see is a high potential talent pool that is very, very diverse. You want to see people from different walks of life. So exclusion, I can't think of any other way of sort of painting it, but that's the biggest thing for me.
Roy.
You're on mute, Roy.
Roy.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was on mute.
Roy, if it's okay, can...
Yes, Abby, carry on.
Yeah, it's just that there are a few great questions coming up on the chat box, and because there's a lot of, reflections, they're sort of getting hidden. So is this an opportune moment to maybe address it to them?
Please
right,
carry
okay.
on. Yeah.
I'll do chronologically, and by the way, I'll mention the name of the question here, so please feel free to unmute and ask the question in a better way than what I'm reading off the text here. So Natasha here asks Mavis that how do you feel code switching affects the experience of people in the workplace, especially in terms of minority, stress, model, and well-being? Natasha, can feel free to come off mute and ask the question. I mean, unless it's absolutely clear to you, Mavis.
Yeah, I think I understand what Natasha's just said about code switching. So I think code switching is something that for people who are from a minority ethnic background like myself, you would understand fully well. So the way I speak to people at work is quite different from the way I speak to my kids. It's very different from the way I speak to my sister when I'm talking to her, for instance. People come to work a lot of the time a slightly different version of themselves to fit in. And it's quite burdening, having to do that over and over again. As I said earlier on, not being your full authentic self. And I think I read some research on this a few months ago, talking about how this affects sort of the overall sort of mental well-being of people eventually. Because what it means is you feel, I wrote about this actually in my own personal experience, because this impacted on my own mental health a few years back. It led to a breakdown for myself eventually, and this was because of the sort of responsibility, the added responsibility I put on myself, because I felt like I had to excel, I felt like I had to exceed, I had to give 110%. Is that sort of burden you carry with you, feeling like, you know, you have to prove yourself, you know, because people assume you're incompetent and you're not capable of doing the work. So you work harder and harder, and I was working till 2 a.m. in the morning, sometimes 3 a.m., and I'll be awake at 6 again to repeat the cycle, you know, 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week. So that code switching for people, where you come to work a slightly different version of yourself, if you're not careful, it would eventually send you down the same path it sent me. And that's why I'm a big advocate for mental health, because I was eventually diagnosed with clinical depression and stress and anxiety induced by work. So it's quite real, and it's something that affects a disproportionate amount of people from ethnic minority origins.
Right. Thanks, Mavis, for sharing that. Nike had a question again on your your personal experience, where she asks, "What's your view on you being managed by people who are less qualified and less competent than you are? How do you feel about it?"
That's a tricky one, because I speak to people a lot of the time, especially in the line of work I'm doing and the research I'm doing as well, and it affects people in a very deep, fundamental way. I talked about you coming to work a smaller version of yourself. So you come to work and you feel, you know what, I'm just going to give the barest minimum, you know. And then if you're someone who is not outspoken, if someone who is not able to challenge, what you find is you come to work, you know, you're not as productive. And that's why there's research. I think McGregor Smith did this research in the paper they put out in 2017 of what underemployment is causing the economy. I believe it's causing the UK economy about £24 billion a year. So if all the people from ethnic minority backgrounds are fully utilized in the UK labour market, it's an additional £24 million, you know, to be added to the UK economy. And to put that into perspective, the extractive industries, of which oil and gas is part of, the annual sort of output in GVA, or gross value added terms, is about 18 billion. So think about it. The value that we would bring to the UK economy is about 24 billion a year extra on top of the current, you know, GDP.
Yep.
I think there's another question here, which actually ties with what you're saying, from Apriyani Nasiruddin. It says, talking about coming to work, a smaller version of oneself. I have experienced it myself in recent years. I have been made to feel I didn't deserve my senior role. So, can you shed light a little bit on it? Because what I find sometimes is some people who actually eventually get into the senior leadership role are almost somewhat condescended against, you know, in their role. Can you shed a little bit of light on that as well?
So I believe maybe what you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you're describing sort of tokenistic promotion, where you feel like, you know, you don't really deserve it and you've just been promoted. Is that what you're talking about, Roy?
I'm guessing, Apriyani, I'm guessing that is what he means. But certainly I have seen situations where, you know, people get to senior leadership responsibilities, and in the end, you know, they are made to feel less, you know, less deserving of the role.
Yeah. So again, this is one of those sort of microaggressions that you sometimes encounter in the office or in the corporate world. So it doesn't always happen, but you see it sometimes. And I mean, one way around this is just to keep believing in yourself and just press on, just crack on. So it's their problem, not your problem. So if you've been given the opportunity, learn from the opportunity. Sometimes you may fail, sometimes you may not, but guess what? That's part of leadership. But the thing people need to realize about leadership is about someone being given the chance to develop. You don't get into a leadership position because you're perfect, you fit everything. You don't become you know, even a president of a country, because you're perfect in everything, you have, you know, straight A's. I mean, if Donald Trump can be president, then anyone can be president, right? So, I mean, the point I'm just trying to raise here is, you know, when you become a leader or you're aspiring to become a leader, don't seek perfection. And that's why I talk about sponsors, because it's all about potential. You need someone with the right potential, with the right skill set. If you feel the person with the right support can grow, can develop in the role, then they should be promoted. So if Mr. A gets promoted and he's different from you, it doesn't mean he's got the job because he's so perfect and he can do everything brilliantly. He's just got the right sponsor that's put him forward for that job. If you get the opportunity as well and people are talking behind your back like, you know, I don't think she deserves it, it's just because she's black, you know, they need a black person in the team. You know what? It's their problem, not yours. Just focus on your work and do the best you can do in that job. The more we have conversations like this, the more you get more diverse people being promoted to different leadership positions. And hopefully in a few years' time, we won't need to be talking about this and talking about feeling uncomfortable because you've been promoted.
Indeed.
Roy, I'll just chip in because Oli has a very interesting question, which is sort of juxtaposed in the other direction, which says that how would you say to people who hears these issues and then say we have a chip on our shoulder?
Right. You know, think about a diplomatic answer to provide for that. If you're driving down the street, you're brown, you're black, and you get stopped by a policeman, you're like 10 times more likely to be searched, for instance. And you know and expect that would happen when you're driving through the streets of London. How will you not have a chip on your shoulder? If you go through airport security and you're more likely to be stopped and searched than any other person. If you have a group of 5 boys, for instance, teenagers playing in the park, and then they pick on the black child and describe him as the black child in the hoodie, when everyone else had a hoodie as well, but the black child for some reason wearing a hoodie or suddenly a gangster, how would you not have a chip on your shoulder? I don't think we have a chip on our shoulders the way that people like to describe. I think what people fail to realize is we are now, you know, to borrow the vernacular of the younger generation, we are now woke. You know, people are no longer just sitting idle and accepting things as, you know, that's how it is and we'll just do our best, put your head down like the way our parents have told us to. People are becoming more confident in themselves and they're speaking out. So unfortunately, George Floyd had to die for people like myself to have that awareness and confidence to openly speak about race. I'd never talked about race on LinkedIn until George Floyd's death. You know, so many other people are doing the same thing now. So I think self-awareness is different from chip on your shoulder. People are just more aware now.
Okay. Please, I've noticed that we have quite a lot of questions. So we might not be able to go through all of them. However, you know, I want us to get through to some parts where Mavis gives us a bit of, you know, tips for companies. Now, before I jump into that, Mavis, before I ask you to tell, you know, companies and people who are here what steps they can actively take, I'm just going to read a comment from Suzanne at Spirit Energy. Certainly, this points to me that, you know, there are some companies who are taking active steps, you know, to address this at the leadership level and across the organizations. She says, we have made a change to our promotion process to provide equality of opportunity. We have done this by introducing career ladders, which are available for all job families, so everyone can see what is required at each level. We have made our promotion process transparent and also review to ensure that we are promoting based on competency and behaviors in line with our values. We also bring a diversity lens to this process to monitor the diversity of this process. I think training managers to understand the benefits of diversity, understand their biases, and work within a transparent process will be able to make a difference. So this is from Spirit Energy. So, but this is one company. Clearly, you can see that they're taking active steps. Can you give us practical steps that organizations, you know, and certainly the leadership can take to create a more inclusive structure?
Yeah. So before I answer that question, I'd like to just sort of give a big shout out to Spirit Energy, because Spirit Energy is one of the few companies that actually highlight as a model when it comes to what they're doing to set up a more diverse, a robust, diverse framework for the organization, and they're doing a lot of amazing things. So the first thing I would suggest to companies is you need to start by establishing the baseline. Companies are usually too quick to want to provide solutions without understanding what the problem is. So you need to establish a baseline, estimate your data qualitatively and quantitatively as well. And don't hide behind BAME figures. In fact, that's one of the only few good things that came out of the recent reports talking about dropping the term BAME. Because when you hide behind BAME, you may be hiding disparity between ethnic groups. For instance, last year when McKinsey produced the report comparing employees of similar ages, qualification, occupation, and sector, what they found was ethnic minority workers on average earned about 10% less than white workers. If you distill that figure further by ethnic groups, what you find is if you're Bangladeshi, you are 20%, your pay gap between yourself and your white counterpart with similar experiences, skills, gender, and so on is 20%. If you're Black, Pakistani, or other Asians, 13%. If you take the average, that's about 10%. So you need to actually calculate effectively and use robust statistical data. Don't just hide behind the big data. And as well, you need to build a robust framework. So with the same seriousness, you would develop a sustainable business plan, build a robust equity, diversity, and inclusion framework. Look at your leadership team. It's got to stop at the top, start at the top. If you don't start by building your diversity right from the most senior level, then you're not going to get anywhere when it comes to diversity. It's going to be something that's for employee resource groups, HR, or people who are interested in those things. If you want it to be serious, the right language has to be used right from the leadership team, from the top. You've got to look at talent management in a slightly different lens. Who are you promoting? Because we talk about equality. Do we really want equality or do we want equity? Because equality is treating everyone, equally, the same. But we're not all the same. We have different experiences. If I've worked there for 10, 20, 15 years, I'm not getting promoted. And someone else who started, 5 years after me, I was there when they, came in from uni, they're now my manager and I have all the right skills and experiences. I don't want to be treated equally. So if you look at your talent pool and you're focusing on particular groups who are disadvantaged, underrepresented, that's not discrimination. That's trying to treat people equitably, not equally. And as well as your talent management, you look at the organizational culture. You say things like, I'm not talking about you generally, Roy, I'm talking about companies. You go to people's websites and you see things like, we're an equal opportunities employer, we believe in diversity, blah, blah, blah. We have a diverse workforce. But what does that actually mean? Can your employees bring their whole authentic selves to work? So can I work in this company A or company B without having to change my name, without having to fit in and be someone else completely differently, code switch, as someone else has said? Because if you're not including people from different groups with intent, you're probably excluding. And then lastly, let's look at the supply chain. So I'm not saying we need to start dictating to what our supply chain should do or shouldn't do, but I'd like to sort of give an example of child labor, for instance. If I'm a big, operator, say in oil and gas, or big manufacturer, and I'm strictly against child labor, but my contractors are using child labor to produce goods for me, what does that make me? So if I'm insisting on diversity for my company, what about the supply chain? You need to engage with them and have a conversation with them to say, this is the journey we're embarking on. I would like you to come along with us. Let's talk together and see what we can do to promote diversity and inclusion. And then finally, you need to monitor and review. You don't come up with like HSC plans and after a year or 3 months, you forget about it. You're constantly reviewing. There are KPIs for HSC. Why shouldn't we have one for diversity? In fact, why don't we link it to the bonus or the performance reward for senior management? If they can't introduce diversity, if they're not actively, thinking diversely when they're making decisions, why should they be rewarded? So, we need to think about things like that.
Thank you very much, Mavis. There is a lot of questions in the chat section, and unfortunately, some of them are really very interesting. I'm thinking, Mavis, would it be possible for us to have another session which we can add to this video where we answer quite a few of these questions, because these are burning questions that people want to see answered. So we can have this kind of like an appendix video that we can merge with this particular one, just to answer, strictly to answer most of these questions, because some of them are very interesting. For example, someone mentioned and said glass ceiling is for white folks, and black
Brick
wall,
Yeah.
black wall is for colored people or for black people. So I want those questions addressed, because does that mean that we have been addressing the wrong issue, or have we been not focusing on what the real issues are? So there are a lot of questions that I hear that I really would like us to answer, and maybe please crave your indulgence to say we would need to create a follow-up session just to answer some of these questions, and we can merge this with this video when it's available, and it will be available on YouTube in the coming weeks. We have 10 more minutes. I would like us to get something out of this, and I wanted you to give us tips. What tips can you give? So we've already touched on what companies should be doing. Now, what tips can you give, Black people, Asian people, colored people in general, who are looking to make that transition into executive roles, from middle management into executive roles, who have gone through, the technical ladder of the organizations and even up to mid-management level, and they want to progress into senior leadership roles. What tips would you outline for us?
I'll share a few tips. The first one I'll share is self-awareness. So self-awareness is quite a big one for me. It's not something I took seriously until a few years ago. So developing a confident version of yourself, because you need that confidence if you're moving towards senior leadership roles. It starts with self-awareness. So what motivates you? What are your values? What do you stand for? What do you want to achieve from a career? Because saying I want to get promoted is not enough. You need to know the answer to these questions. What I did a few years back is I actually sat down and I did a deep dive. I wrote down the answers to these things. If you don't know what you stand for, if you don't know what you actually want to achieve from your career, then maybe leadership is not really for you, because you shouldn't just be aspiring to be a leader, to be promoted. Ask yourself, why do I want to be promoted? What do I want out of this career? And as well, knowledge of craft. That's a very, very important one. So you will struggle with confidence. You will struggle with leadership if you don't know your craft. If you're in communications, you need to know how to communicate. If you're working in commercial, you need to love figures, or finance, for instance, engineering, you need to have the right skills. So if you don't have those basic skills, or even if you have those skills, ask yourself, how can I better myself? How can I be, empowered in what I do, such that if you step out of yourself for a second and you're joining a new team, would you ask yourself for help? Not sure if I'm making sense with that.
Yeah,
so are you someone who is able to impact knowledge on others, impart knowledge in others? If the answer is no, then look for creative ways to develop yourself. There's YouTube, there's speaking to people, there's attending training courses, look for a mentor. I would always recommend a mentor. I've always had mentors. Mentors are excellent, particularly someone who doesn't work in your company. Look for someone you can speak to confidently that would help you, point you in the right direction in terms of what to do. Another thing is recognition of your work. I talked about how myself, because of my cultural background, what I was told by my parents was focus hard on your work, head down, your work will speak for itself. You made good grades in uni, they'll see the value you have, and so on and so forth. Guess what? That hasn't really worked for me. Your work needs to be recognized. You need to find out who the key influencers are in your organization. And that's what I usually tell people that speak to me and ask about, what do I need to do to progress, especially when you're starting a new job. Identify who the key influencers are. The key influencer might not even be your manager, it might be someone else. Get your work in front of them. Don't rely on luck or hard work. You need to get recognized for your work. Speak about what you do and don't be afraid to shout out your own praise, for something you've done. Celebrate yourself. Another thing is personal projection. And this is quite important for us as well, because how do you project yourself at work? So are you living up to the stereotype, particularly for Black females? Are you living up to the stereotype of what Americans call mammy figure? So you're there to be, shoulder for people to cry on, and you're always cleaning and making teas in the office and stuff. I'm not saying that's bad or anything, but are you projecting yourself as a leader? If you're aspiring to be a leader, then project yourself as one. Your personal brand. I can see someone's just sent a message there from Izzy. What's your personal brand? Another thing is, well, I've touched on this, Roy, and we've talked about this in the past, volunteering. So I'm a big advocate for volunteering, but volunteer carefully, because we have some people, particularly from ethnic minority background, who just shy away from volunteering because you feel, if I'm not being paid for it, then why do I want to give my time to this? But volunteering is a very, very important way of getting some key skills and experiences that you perhaps wouldn't get in work. Organizations such as AFBE, charities, churches, working with kids, so many things you can do. And as well, we need to thoughtfully challenge. I know, even from my personal experience, that your confidence gets bruised from time to time, especially when things happen and then you take it to heart and you feel, well, am I good enough, and so on. But like any muscle, when you practice challenging thoughtfully, you get better at it. So if you're excluded from meetings, if you're excluded from opportunities, find a way to challenge, but challenge thoughtfully. And the last but not least I want to share, conscious of the time, is you need to ensure balance in your life outside work. I know people talk about this all the time, work-life balance. I'm not saying everything has to be balanced, because I don't think I have perfectly balanced life right now, or probably ever. But one thing I'm a very big, advocate of is ensuring that, you value life. There's more to life than work. Some of the most successful people I can think about, CEOs and so on, the people who are happier in their life outside work. If your whole life is just work, then I'm sorry, you would struggle, particularly when you hit pitfalls, because it's part of life. When you're a leader, you'll have good days, you'll have bad days, you have times where you smash, things to the park, and you have days where you don't. So what gets you through it is your hobbies and your things outside work. So that's really important, having that balance outside your work.
Thank you, Mavis. One last question before we go. Ethnic diversity at the top, fantasy or reality? Which is it? I
think it's a reality. It's a reality that's coming. And that's why some people are uncomfortable when we talk about things like this. I mean, I posted, whenever I post on diversity on LinkedIn, for instance, I get trolls. Some people respond to me directly with also nasty messages. And rather than actually make me feel bad or miserable, it actually makes me feel happy, because I feel like, I'm getting somewhere. When people start getting uncomfortable, it's because you're hitting a raw nerve. They know that, you are someone who is achieving something. You're, to borrow that language again, you're woke. You can see things that are happening and you can challenge. So the more we have the dialogue, the more we start to normalize discussions like these. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mavis. And like I've said, we will be going through these questions again, and we would have another video which we will append to this particular one, just to answer most of the questions. Now, for most of you who are not aware of AFBE, AFBE has been involved in a number of things. We've certainly been involved in a number of the reports, which Mavis has certainly mentioned. We also have a mentoring scheme where we take people of BAME origin and provide mentors for them to help them in their progression, basically, in their careers. And certainly, we're not only looking at people at leadership roles, we're looking at from graduate roles all the way up to the top. without a doubt, I would like you to check out, the AFBE website, check out the things that we're doing. We have quite a few partners that we're working with, very progressive companies who have joined as members of AFBE. So certainly, please do keep in touch, do register to become a member of AFBE. And also within AFBE, we have the leadership team where we are starting to work on some of these topics, and we're addressing it as a team. My co-hosts, Abby Goswami and Bitrus, are both members of this leadership team. And these are certainly topics that we are addressing within the leadership team. And very soon we will be coming out with a program that helps to address some of these issues that we're talking about as almost, think of it like a mini MBA program. So without further ado, I would like to say thank you to every one of you who's been able to make it here today. We very much appreciate it. We will set the video and notifications will be sent out to people when the video is ready and posted on YouTube, so you can revisit the video and watch it again.
Roy, the gala.
Yes, and one more thing. My boss has said everyone should buy your ticket for the gala. We have the AFBE gala. I must tell you, it is one of the most exciting events. I look forward to it every 2 years, actually. Unfortunately, because of the COVID, it was postponed to this year. So the tickets are online at afbeuk.org and AFBE Scotland as well. Please check the website, buy the gala ticket. It's an opportunity for you to network. It's an opportunity for you to see all the great things that AFBE has been doing and is currently doing, because there will be a summary video, summary event, and there will definitely be awards given out to people. So thank you very much to everyone who's been able to make it tonight. Look forward to the next talk, which will be the first Wednesday of next month. And it will be a talk on stepping outside your comfort zone. So it fits nicely into this talk of diversity and inclusion. Now we need to step outside our comfort zone and start putting ourselves out there. Like Mavis said, know your brand, sell your brand. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely night. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy.
Thank you, Mavis. Thank you, Abby and Beatrice. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Roy, do you want me to stay on the call?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So that we will just have
thanks, Roy. Thanks, Abby. Thank you, Mavis. Fantastic talk.
Thank you.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thanks,
Cassie, how are you?
Mavis. Lovely talk. Very
Odie, you
interesting.
got me
Thanks,
there.
Roy, as well.
You were never going to escape that evening. Oh, Mavis, that was. Oh, I don't even know where to start, but yeah, I'm going to give you a call. But that was awesome.
All right.
Awesome. I mean, seriously, wow.
Roy.
Right. Speak